Ambassador Zethkari walked into the great hall of the Galactic Council, with his head held high and his chest pushed out like all proper. Vorthek warriors did when they entered any room. His heavy boots made loud sounds on the metal floor as he moved toward the front seats where all the important people sat during these big meetings. The Vorthek Empire controlled more star systems than any other group in the galaxy, and everyone knew it. When Zethkari took his place in the front row next to the other powerful leaders, he felt proud of his people and their strong military force. The hall filled up quickly as representatives from dozens of different alien species found their seats. The Xerians, with their big brains and pale skin, hurried to sit close to the speaker's platform because they always wanted to hear every word and ask smart questions. The Kalari moved like liquid metal as they flowed into seats near the front, where their advanced technology made them feel they belonged. The merchants Loth pushed and shoved to get good spots because in their culture, the best deals went to those who sat closest to the money. Everyone knew the rules without anyone having to say them out loud. The strongest species sat in front. The richest groups took the second row. The smartest races filled the third row. This was how things worked in the galaxy, and how they had always worked for as long as anyone could remember. Power meant sitting close to where decisions got made. Weakness meant sitting far away, where your voice would not be heard very well. But then something strange happened that made Zethkari stop and look around with confusion on his face. Captain Jake Morrison walked into the hall wearing the simple blue uniform of Earth's Space Navy. Behind him came Dr. Lisa Park in her white scientist coat with papers under her arm. They both moved at an easy pace, without rushing or pushing like so many others did. Jake looked around the room once and then started walking toward the back of the hall. Lisa followed him without asking any questions. Zethkari watched them pass row after row of empty seats until they reached the very last row in the back corner. Jake sat down in a chair that faced the speaker's platform, but gave him a view of the whole room. Lisa took the seat next to him and spread her papers out on the small table in front of them. They both looked comfortable and ready for the meeting to start. This made no sense to Zethkari at all. He had studied the human military record and knew they were not weak fighters. Human ships had helped win battles against space pirates in the Outer Rim. Human soldiers had fought bravely during the mining colony wars 3 years ago. Human scientists had created new weapons that worked very well. These were not the actions of a weak species. They should sit in the back like children or servants. The Vorthek ambassador turned in his seat to get a better look at the humans. Jake Morrison had gray hair and lines around his eyes that showed he had seen many battles. His hands looked strong, and his back was straight like a real soldier. Lisa Park was younger, but her eyes moved around the room in a way that showed she was always thinking and watching. Neither of them looked scared or ashamed to be sitting so far from the important people. When the meeting started, the speaker called for reports from each species about their military strength and trade agreements. One by one, the ambassadors in the front rows stood up to talk about how powerful their people were and how much territory they controlled. The Vorthek spoke about their war fleets. The Xerians talked about their research stations. The Kalari described their factory worlds that built machines for half the galaxy. Jake Morrison and Lisa Park listened to everything, but never tried to speak louder or push forward to be heard better. When their turn came, Jake stood up calmly in the back row and gave a short report about Earth's colonies and trade routes. His voice carried well through the room, even though he was far away from the microphones. Lisa added some facts about human population growth and resource production. Then they both sat down without trying to get more attention or praise. After the meeting ended, Zethkari watched the humans again. Other species crowded around the front of the room, trying to talk to the speaker and make private deals. The humans gathered their papers slowly and walked toward the exit without stopping to talk to anyone important. They seemed satisfied with their day, even though they had not gained any new power or made themselves look stronger than other groups. This pattern continued meeting after meeting. Zethkari began to notice it everywhere he went. At military planning sessions, the humans sat in back corners. During trade negotiations, they took seats away from the main table. At scientific conferences, they found spots in the last rows. It was always the same thing, no matter what kind of meeting happened or who else was there. The strange behavior started to bother Zethkari more and more. He asked other ambassadors if they had noticed the same thing. The Zarian representative said yes, he had seen it too, and thought maybe humans were not very smart about politics. The Kalari leader said it was probably because humans did not have enough confidence to sit with the real powers in the galaxy. The Sloth merchant said it proved that humans did not understand how important business worked, but none of these explanations felt right to Zethkari. He had fought alongside human soldiers and knew they were not lacking in confidence. He had seen human negotiators make good deals for their people. He had watched human scientists solve problems that other species could not figure out. There had to be another reason why they always chose to sit in the back when they could easily take better seats. The mystery grew bigger in his mind with each passing day. Why would a species that had proven itself capable in war and peace choose to look weak in front of everyone else? What were the humans really doing back there in those last rows where no one paid attention to them? Zethkari decided he would watch them more carefully and try to understand what they were thinking. He did not know that this question would soon become the most important thing he had ever wondered about in his long life as a warrior and diplomat. The weeks that followed gave Zethkari plenty of chances to watch the humans and their strange seating habits. At every important gathering, the same thing happened. The powerful species rushed to claim the front seats, while Jake Morrison and Lisa Park calmly walked to the back of the room. Other human representatives did the same thing when they came to different meetings. It was like they had all agreed to stay away from the places where real power was shown. The Vorthic ambassador began to feel pleased about this behavior. In his warrior culture, strength was everything and weakness had to be punished or at least acknowledged properly. When weaker species knew their place and did not challenge the strong ones, everyone could live in peace and order. Maybe the humans had finally learned that the Vorthic Empire was too powerful for them to compete against directly. General Morthek of the Vorthic fleet visited the space station during a military conference, and Zethkari shared his observations about human seating patterns. The old general laughed and slapped his hand on the table with satisfaction. He said it proved that humans understood their position in the galaxy's natural order. Small species with weak armies belonged in the back where they could watch real warriors make the important decisions about war and peace. The Zerian Science Council had their own ideas about why humans sat in the back rows. Professor Zeldar believed it showed that humans lacked the intellectual confidence to debate with superior minds. He had seen human scientists present good research, but they never argued with Zerian theories or tried to prove that their ideas were better. This seemed to prove that they knew their thinking was not as advanced as the older and smarter species in the galaxy. During one research meeting, Professor Zeldar watched Dr. Lisa Park take notes while sitting in the last row. She wrote down everything that was said, but never raised her hand to ask questions or challenge any of the complex theories being discussed. When the meeting ended, she gathered her papers quietly and left without trying to talk to any of the important Zerian researchers. This behavior made perfect sense to Zeldar, because obviously humans were still learning from their betters. The Kelari had a different explanation that they thought was very clever. Ambassador Fluxara believed that humans were using a sneaky political strategy to appear harmless, while they secretly planned to gain power through other methods. By sitting in the back and acting humble, they made other species think they were not a threat. Then later they could surprise everyone with hidden military buildup or economic tricks. This theory worried some of the smaller species who remembered that humans had once been very aggressive during their early space exploration period. The Altarians, who valued diplomatic peace above everything else, watched the humans carefully for signs that they were planning something dangerous. But months passed without any proof that humans were building secret fleets or making hidden alliances with other powers. The merchant sloth developed their own understanding of human behavior that focused on trade and money. Captain Voronik, who controlled several important shipping routes, said that humans sat in the back because they did not understand how galactic commerce really worked. In sloth culture, the beings who made the most profit sat closest to where deals were made. Anyone who chose seats away from the money table was either too poor to compete or too stupid to know better. Voronik had watched Commander Beth Rodriguez attend trade meetings where she sat in corners and listened to negotiations without trying to make better offers for human goods. This proved to him that Earth's economy was too weak to challenge the established trade powers. Humans were probably happy to accept whatever small profits they could get without causing trouble for the species that controlled the real wealth in the galaxy. All of these theories seemed reasonable to the aliens who created them. Every species understood human behavior through the lens of their own culture and values. The warriors saw submission to strength. The scientists saw intellectual humility. The politicians saw sneaky strategy. The merchants saw economic weakness. Nobody questioned whether their assumptions might be completely wrong. The real test of these theories came during the emergency military planning session, when news arrived that the Devour swarm had been detected at the edge of the galaxy. These were not normal enemies that could be negotiated with or frightened away with displays of power. The Devour consumed entire star systems and left nothing behind but empty space where planets and stars had once existed. Every species in the galaxy would have to work together to stop them, or everything would be destroyed. Admiral Kyle Bennett arrived at the crisis meeting wearing the dark uniform of Earth's deep space fleet. His face looked serious and tired, like someone who had been studying terrible news for many hours without sleep. Commander Beth Rodriguez came with him carrying data tablets that contained information about human military capabilities and ship positions. They both walked directly to the back corner of the war room without looking at the front tables where the galaxy's greatest military leaders were gathering. General Morthic watched them sit down and felt his anger growing hot in his chest. This was not the time for games or false modesty. The survival of everything they had built was at stake, and everyone needed to contribute their best efforts to the fight. If humans wanted to act like cowards and sit in the back during normal meetings, that was annoying, but not dangerous. But now their behavior looked like they were preparing to run away when real fighting started. The old Vorthic general stood up from his seat at the main planning table and pointed at the humans in the corner. His voice carried across the room when he spoke, and everyone stopped their conversations to listen. He said that maybe it was time to talk honestly about what human seating choices really meant. Did they sit in the back because they planned to retreat first when the Devour swarm attacked? Were they keeping their distance from the real military leaders because they did not want to be held responsible for the hard decisions that would need to be made? Admiral Bennett looked up from his data tablets when he heard his name being called. His expression stayed calm and professional, even though the accusation was very serious and insulting. He stood up slowly and said that humans were comfortable with their seating arrangements and ready to do their part in the coming war. He did not sound angry or defensive, just quiet and steady, like someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. This response made General Morthic even more frustrated because it seemed to confirm everything he had suspected about human weakness. A real warrior would have gotten angry at such an insult and demanded satisfaction through combat, or at least harsh words. But Admiral Bennett just sat back down and continued reading his reports like nothing important had happened. The other species in the room watched this exchange with great interest. Some nodded in agreement with the Vorthic general's criticism. Others felt uncomfortable about attacking allies during a crisis, but did not speak up to defend the humans. Everyone had their own opinions about what they had just witnessed, but none of them understood what they were really seeing. Jake Morrison, who had been taking notes during the whole meeting, finally looked up and caught Admiral Bennett's eye. They shared a quick look that seemed to communicate something important between them. Then Jake went back to his writing, while Bennett returned to studying the tactical information about Devour swarm movements and attack patterns. Neither of them seemed worried about the criticism or eager to prove anything to the assembled military leaders. They acted like beings who knew exactly what they were doing and did not need anyone else's approval to do it properly. But to the aliens watching them, it looked like acceptance of their inferior status in the galactic military hierarchy. The Devour swarm arrived 6 days earlier than the galaxy's best scientists had predicted. The first warning came from the Outer Rim colonies, where automated defense stations went silent one after another in a pattern that moved steadily toward the core worlds. Admiral Bennett was reviewing supply reports in his quarters when the emergency alerts sounded throughout the space station. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and the calm voice of the station computer announced that all military personnel should report to battle stations immediately. Within 2 hours, the main war room filled with the galaxy's most powerful military leaders, all talking at once and trying to understand what was happening. The giant display screens showed a terrifying picture of destruction moving through space like a hungry storm. Entire solar systems were disappearing from the galaxy map as the Devour swarm consumed everything in its path. Planets that had been home to billions of beings were gone without leaving any trace behind. General Morthic stood at the main command table studying the tactical situation with growing confidence. His Vorthic battle fleets were the strongest military force the galaxy had ever seen. Their ships carried the biggest weapons, and their warriors had won every major war for the past century. The approaching enemy might be dangerous, but they would learn what happened when they faced the might of a true warrior species. The Vorthic general gave orders to his fleet commanders with the authority of someone who had never lost a battle. His ships would form the main attack line and charge directly at the largest concentrations of Devour forces. This aggressive strategy had worked against every enemy the Vorthic had ever fought. Superior firepower and brave warriors would win. The day just like they always had before. Professor Zeldar coordinated the Zarian analysis teams from his position near the front of the war room. His people had built computer models that predicted exactly how the battle would develop based on mathematical calculations and logical thinking. The Zarian battle computers would process information faster than any enemy could react and give the Allied fleet perfect tactical knowledge about where to attack and when to retreat. The Kalari contributed their advanced weapons, technology, and energy shields that could protect the most important command ships during the fighting. Their manufacturing systems worked around the clock to produce ammunition and replacement parts for damaged vessels. Ambassador Fluxara felt confident that Kalari industrial capacity would provide enough resources to outlast any enemy, no matter how large their forces might be. All of these preparations were made by species that took their positions at the front of every planning meeting and command briefing. They had earned the right to lead through centuries of success and power. The smaller species would follow their orders and support their strategies, just like they always did during times of crisis. Admiral Bennett and Commander Rodriguez remained in their corner seats throughout the emergency preparations. They received the same tactical briefings as everyone else, but did not try to change the battle plans or argue with the decisions. being made by the senior military leaders. Bennett took notes while Rodriguez managed communications with human fleet units that were moving toward the battle zone from their patrol positions. The first engagement began when Vorthik heavy cruisers encountered the leading edge of the Devour swarm near the Kilo system. General Morthek watched the battle through real-time video links that showed his ships firing their massive weapons at targets that looked like living creatures made of metal and energy. The initial reports were good because Vorthik firepower was destroying large numbers of enemy units, just as predicted. But then something went wrong in a way that no one had expected. The Devourer creatures did not attack the Vorthik ships randomly or try to overwhelm them with superior numbers. Instead, they focused all of their efforts on destroying the command vessels that were broadcasting orders to the rest of the fleet. General Morthek watched in horror as his flagship and the ships of his senior officers were torn apart by concentrated enemy fire, while the regular battle cruisers were left almost untouched. Within 30 minutes, the entire Vorthik attack formation fell apart because the beings who knew how to coordinate their movements were all dead or floating in space inside wrecked ships. The surviving vessels tried to continue fighting, but they had no way to work together effectively. Some ships retreated towards safe positions, while others advanced into enemy fire zones. The most powerful military force in the galaxy became a scattered collection of confused and frightened warriors. The Zarian analysis systems failed in an even more spectacular way. Professor Zeldar had positioned his smartest researchers and most advanced computers on ships that were supposed to stay behind the main battle line, where they would be safe from direct attack. But the Devourer forces seemed to know exactly where these analysis centers were located. Enemy units broke through the defensive formations and destroyed every ship that contained important Zarian scientists or tactical computers. Professor Zeldar himself died when his research vessel was caught by a group of Devourer creatures that moved faster than his mathematical models had said was possible. The brilliant mind that had created strategies for dozens of successful campaigns was gone in seconds, along with all of the knowledge and experience he had accumulated over his long career. The remaining Zarian ships found themselves flying blind, without the guidance systems they had always depended on. The Kalari industrial stations suffered the same kind of targeted destruction. The enemy somehow knew which facilities were most important for producing weapons and supplies. They bypassed heavily defended military bases and struck directly at the manufacturing centers that kept the Allied fleets operating. Ambassador Fluxara watched helplessly as centuries of technological development were wiped out by creatures that seemed to understand galactic military doctrine better than the species that had created it. Panic spread through the combined fleet as one command structure after another collapsed under the precise attacks of the Devour swarm. Species that had ruled the galaxy for generations found themselves leaderless and confused. Their carefully planned battle formations became chaotic mobs of individual ships trying to survive without any coordination or support from higher authority. The communication channels filled with desperate calls for new orders and requests for reinforcement that could not be answered because the beings who normally gave such orders were dead. Captains who had spent their entire careers following commands from superior officers suddenly found themselves making life and death decisions without any guidance or backup plans. Admiral Bennett listened to the radio traffic from his position in the back corner of the war room. The voices of alien commanders grew more frantic with each passing hour as they realized that everything they had planned was falling apart. Commander Rodriguez monitored the tactical displays that showed friendly forces scattering in all directions, while the Devourer swarm continued its steady advance toward the core worlds. Bennett finally stood up from his chair and walked over to the main communication console. He pressed the button that would connect him to all human fleet units and spoke in a calm voice that cut through the chaos and confusion. He said that it was time to implement Human Protocol 7 and that all Earth vessels should immediately switch to emergency command procedures. Most of the surviving alien officers were too busy trying to save their own ships to pay attention to what the humans were doing. A few heard Bennett's transmission and wondered what Human Protocol 7 might be, but they had more urgent problems to worry about. The species that had always sat in the back of meeting rooms were about to show everyone why they had chosen those seats. Lieutenant Sam Clark was working at his communication station aboard the human destroyer New Horizon when Admiral Bennett's transmission reached every Earth vessel in the battle zone. The young officer had been listening to the desperate radio. Calls from alien commanders whose fleets were falling apart under the precise attacks of the Devour swarm. Now he watched his own captain respond to the Protocol 7 order with calm efficiency that seemed almost impossible given the chaos happening all around them. Captain Ryan Foster had been sitting in his command chair reviewing tactical data when the order came through. He did not jump up or start shouting commands like the alien officers Sam had seen on the video channels. Instead, Foster pressed a single button on his chair arm and spoke quietly to his crew. He told them that Protocol 7 was now active and that everyone should switch to their backup positions immediately. Sam watched in fascination as his fellow crew members moved around the bridge in a pattern they had practiced hundreds of times during training exercises. The senior officers left their normal stations and went to secondary positions that were spread throughout the ship. The captain moved away from his prominent command chair and set up a mobile control station in a corner where he could see everything, but where enemy targeting systems would have trouble finding him. Professor Ventar of the Kalari Science Expedition had been rescued from his destroyed research ship by a human patrol cruiser. He was now standing on the bridge of the New Horizon, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans were not running away from the battle or hiding from the enemy like he had expected. Instead, they seemed to be preparing for a different kind of fight using methods that made no sense according to everything he knew about military strategy. Sam noticed the alien scientist watching their movements with confusion on his face. During a brief break in his communication duties, the lieutenant decided to explain what was happening. He said that humans had learned long ago that putting important people in obvious places was a quick way to lose wars. The Devour swarm was winning because they knew how to find and kill the leaders of other species, but they would have much more trouble against enemies who did not follow those patterns. Professor Ventar asked why human captains would leave their command chairs if those positions were designed to give them the best control over their ships. Sam smiled and pointed to Captain Foster, who was now operating from a station that looked exactly like every other work position on the bridge. He said that a good leader could command from anywhere and that staying alive was more important than looking impressive to other people. The alien scientist wanted to know how human crews could function without the clear hierarchy and visible authority that other species use to maintain order during combat. Sam explained that every human officer was trained to take command if the people above them were killed or injured. They did not need to waste time figuring out who was in charge, because everyone knew their backup roles and could switch positions without losing effectiveness. This conversation was interrupted when the New Horizon received new orders from Admiral Bennett, who was coordinating the human response from his position in the back corner of the war room. The Admiral's voice came through the communication system with instructions that sounded nothing like the traditional military commands that Professor Ventar was used to hearing. Instead of ordering ships to attack specific targets or move to designated positions, Bennett was giving his captains permission to use their own judgment about how to fight the enemy. Captain Foster acknowledged the orders and then turned to his crew with a look of determination on his face. He said that they were going to show the Devour Swarm what happened when they tried to use standard tactics against people who had spent centuries learning how to survive when everything went wrong. The human approach to warfare was not about looking strong or following rigid plans, but about adapting quickly when plans failed and continuing to fight even when the situation seemed hopeless. Commander Beth Rodriguez was managing the overall human fleet response from her station next to Admiral Bennett in the war room. She had been watching the tactical displays that showed alien formations collapsing while human units maintained their cohesion despite taking heavy casualties. The difference was becoming clear to everyone who understood what they were seeing. When Vorthic command ships were destroyed, their entire fleets became disorganized because individual captains did not know how to operate without constant orders from their superiors. But when human command vessels were hit, their fleets continued fighting because every captain had been given general objectives and the authority to achieve those goals using whatever methods worked best for their specific situation. The Xerian science ships had been targeted first because they contained the computer systems that other species needed to analyze enemy movements and predict battle outcomes. But humans had distributed their analysis capabilities across many different vessels so that losing any single ship would not cripple their ability to understand what was happening during the fight. Rodriguez explained this to Zeth Kari, who had remained in the war room throughout the crisis. The Vorthic ambassador was trying to comprehend how his mighty warrior fleets had been defeated so quickly while the humans who sat in back corners were still fighting effectively. She told him that human military doctrine was built around the assumption that leaders would be killed and primary plans would fail, because that was what always happened in real wars. Zeth Kari asked why humans had developed such a pessimistic approach to warfare when other species had achieved great success through aggressive leadership and centralized command structures. Rodriguez said that humans had fought wars against each other for thousands of years before they reached space and had learned many painful lessons about what worked and what got people killed unnecessarily. She explained that human history was full of battles where brave leaders died heroically in the front lines while their armies fell apart behind them. Over time, human military thinkers had realized that courage and strength were not enough to win wars against enemies who were equally determined. Victory went to the forces that could adapt when their original strategies failed and continue fighting even when their commanders were dead. The Devourer Swarm had been successful against other species because they used tactics designed to create chaos and confusion in enemy forces. They targeted leaders in communication centers and vital production facilities because they knew that most military organizations could not function without these central control systems. But humans had designed their forces to get stronger when centralized control was removed because individual commanders had more freedom to respond to local conditions. Captain Foster demonstrated this principle when his ship encountered a group of devourer creatures that were different from anything in the tactical briefings. Instead of waiting for orders from higher authority, he immediately began testing different weapons and maneuvers to find effective countermeasures. When he discovered that a specific type of energy pulse could disrupt the enemy's coordination, he shared this information with other human ships without asking permission from anyone. Within minutes, dozens of human vessels were using Foster's discovery to gain advantages against the Devourer forces they were fighting. No single commander had ordered this change in tactics, and no central authority had approved the new strategy. The information spread through the human fleet because individual captains were encouraged to share useful discoveries and adapt their methods based on what was working for other units. Professor Ventar watched this process with growing amazement. He had always assumed that successful military operations required careful planning and strict coordination between different units. But the humans were winning battles through improvisation and flexibility that would have been impossible under the rigid command structures used by other species. Sam Clark noticed the alien scientist's expression and decided to share one more insight about human military thinking. He said that humans did not sit in the back of rooms because they were afraid or weak or lacking in confidence. They chose those positions because that was where you could see everything that was happening and where you were most likely to survive when trouble started. The young lieutenant explained that his grandmother had taught him to always know where the exits were in any building and to sit where he could watch for danger without being an obvious target. These lessons had been passed down through generations of humans who had learned that survival often depended on being smart rather than being brave. As the battle continued to develop, it became clear that the Devour Swarm was facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Their standard tactics were failing against forces that seemed to get more effective as the fighting intensified. The creatures that had destroyed the galaxy's mightiest fleets were now struggling against humans, who refused to fight the way that civilized species were supposed to fight. The turning point in the battle came when Captain Foster's discovery about energy pulse weapons spread through the entire human fleet within 40 minutes of his first successful test. The Devour Swarm had never faced an enemy that could adapt and share new tactics so quickly without waiting for approval from Central Command authorities. Their creatures were designed to win by destroying leadership and creating confusion, but the humans kept fighting effectively even when their ships were scattered across multiple star systems. Admiral Bennett watched the tactical displays from a distance, his corner position in the war room as human forces began to gain ground against the invaders. Small groups of Earth vessels were working together without any direct orders from him or anyone else. Captains were making decisions based on local conditions and sharing successful strategies through the communication network that connected every human ship in the battle zone. Commander Rodriguez was coordinating supply deliveries to damaged vessels when she noticed something remarkable happening on the long-range sensors. The Devour creatures were beginning to pull back from areas where they had been winning just hours earlier. Their attack patterns were becoming less organized as they struggled to understand why their proven tactics were not working against this strange enemy. Zethkari stood behind Rodriguez and watched the sensor readings with growing disbelief. The mighty Vorthic fleets had been destroyed within hours of first contact with the Devour Swarm. The brilliant Zarian analysts had been eliminated before they could develop effective countermeasures. The advanced Kalari industrial systems had been reduced to floating wreckage. But somehow, the humans who sat in back corners were driving the invaders into retreat. The Vorthic ambassador asked Rodriguez how this was possible when human ships were not individually superior to the vessels that had already been destroyed. She explained that the difference was not in the quality of their equipment, but in how they used it. Every human captain was trained to think like an independent commander rather than just following orders from someone else. Rodriguez told him that human children learned very early in life that plans usually failed and that adults who looked like they knew what they were doing were often just as confused as everyone else. This knowledge might seem cynical or pessimistic to other species, but it prepared humans to keep functioning when everything went wrong. She pointed to the tactical display, where human ships were adapting their formations in real time as they discovered new information about enemy capabilities. No central command was directing these changes because the individual captains were making decisions based on what they could see from their own positions. The overall strategy emerged from hundreds of small tactical choices rather than from any single master plan. Captain Foster was leading his ship through a complex maneuver designed to rescue survivors from a destroyed Kalari research station when he encountered the largest concentration of Devour creatures anyone had seen during the entire battle. His first instinct was to call for reinforcements, but then he realized that other human ships in the area were already moving to support him without being asked. Lieutenant Sam Clark was monitoring communications when he heard Captain Foster coordinate the rescue operation using methods that would have seemed chaotic to alien military observers. Instead of giving detailed orders, Foster simply told the other human commanders what he was trying to accomplish and asked them to help, however, they thought would be most effective. The response was immediate and devastating to the Devour forces. Each captain brought their ship into the battle using tactics that worked best for their specific situation. Some provided covering fire, while others moved in to extract survivors. Several ships created diversions that drew enemy attention away from the main rescue effort. The entire operation developed organically, without anyone having to direct every detail. Professor Ventar was still aboard the New Horizon when this rescue began, and he watched the coordination between human vessels with professional fascination. He had spent his career studying military tactics and had never seen anything like what he was observing. The humans were achieving perfect cooperation without the rigid hierarchy and detailed planning that other species considered essential for successful operations. Sam Clark noticed the alien scientist taking notes and decided to share one final insight about human military culture. He said that humans had learned through bitter experience that the most dangerous enemies were often the ones who looked weak or unimportant at first glance. A species that could survive thousands of years of warfare against its own kind had developed very different ideas about what real strength looked like. The lieutenant explained that sitting in the back of rooms was not a sign of submission or fear, but a tactical choice made by people who understood that visibility often meant vulnerability. Human leaders positioned themselves where they could see threats coming and where they would be harder for enemies to find and eliminate. As the battle moved toward its conclusion, Admiral Bennett received reports that Devour forces were retreating from every sector where they had encountered significant human resistance. The creatures that had seemed unstoppable just hours earlier were now avoiding direct confrontations and trying to escape back toward the edge of the galaxy. Bennett stood up from his corner station and walked to the main command table where the surviving alien leaders were gathering to assess the situation. General Morthic was there, looking exhausted and confused by the rapid change in the battle's momentum. Professor Zildar's replacement was studying sensor data and trying to understand how the humans had achieved what the Zerion analysis computers had said was impossible. The human admiral looked around at the aliens who had spent so much time wondering why his people chose seats in the back of every meeting room. He said that humans had developed their unusual habits through centuries of learning that the most important skill in any crisis was the ability to survive long enough to find solutions. Bennett explained that human military doctrine was based on the assumption that initial plans would fail and that leaders would be killed or cut off from their forces. Every human officer was trained to continue fighting even when they had no contact with higher authority and no detailed instructions about what to do next. This preparation had made them uniquely suited to fight an enemy that specialized in creating chaos and confusion. He told the assembled leaders that humans did not sit in back corners because they were afraid or weak, but because that was where commanders needed to be when everything fell apart. In the back, you could see the whole battlefield. In the back, you were harder for enemies to target. In the back, you could protect the people and resources that would be needed to rebuild after the immediate crisis was over. Captain Jake Morrison, who had been taking notes throughout the emergency, finally stood up and added his own perspective on human behavior. He said that every human settlement, from the smallest farming community to the largest space station, was designed with multiple escape routes and backup systems because their species had learned that disasters always happened when you least expected them. Morrison explained that humans did not build their society around the idea that strong leaders would always be there to tell everyone what to do. Instead, they created systems that could keep working even when the people in charge were gone. Every human knew how to take responsibility when necessary and how to work with others without needing detailed instructions from authority figures. The captain said that this approach might look disorganized or inefficient to species that valued clear hierarchy and central control. but it had allowed humans to survive ice ages and plagues and wars and natural disasters that would have destroyed civilizations that depended too heavily on their leaders and institutions. As the final reports came in from the battle zone, it became clear that the Devour Swarm was in full retreat toward the edge of known space. Their creatures had been designed to fight enemies that followed predictable patterns and relied on centralized command structures. Against humans who adapted constantly and fought as independent units, the Swarm's advantages had turned into weaknesses. Commander Rodriguez announced that preliminary casualty reports showed human losses were surprisingly light compared to what other species had suffered during the initial attacks. This was not because human ships were better protected, but because human crews had been trained to survive when their vessels were damaged or when they lost contact with the main fleet. Dr. Lisa Park had been analyzing the tactical data throughout the battle, and now she shared her conclusions with a group of military leaders. She said that the Devour Swarm used hunting strategies that worked perfectly against prey species that grouped together for protection under strong leaders. But humans had evolved different survival strategies that made them much harder to hunt using those methods. Park explained that human ancestors had been both predators and prey during their early evolution and had developed behaviors that helped them survive in both roles. They learned to work together without clustering around dominant individuals who could be targeted by enemies. They learned to scatter and regroup and continue fighting, even when their original plans were disrupted. These ancient survival instincts had shaped human military